Hello, welcome to Inspiring Women with ADHD. I'm Renee Allen, the host of this podcast. And I usually say I'm excited to be here. I've had to talk myself into coming and doing this. It's just one of those days. So I'm sure I'll get excited soon. I'm kind of excited now that I'm talking, but I wanted to be authentic here. Today I want to talk a bit about ADHD, weight loss, changing how you eat, that kind of thing. I'm trying not to say diet, although we all know, what we eat is a diet. But it's interesting to learn how ADHD can make it more difficult for you to stick to a new way of eating, or may even pertain to how your eating patterns have been in your life. So the first one is dopamine levels. And when you have ADHD, you have low dopamine levels and low GABA levels. And GABA has to do with mood and being at ease, and that's produced in the brain also. But dopamine is lower for you than somebody without ADHD. Although there may be other people who have low dopamine, but your ADHD brain craves dopamine, which is a neurotransmitter from your brain that affects your mood, motivation, memory, and things like that. So it's craving that. It needs it. And you can get dopamine from eating sugar, carbs, or whatever it is that really relaxes you when you eat it. And so it may not pertain as much to what someone might call a balanced meal, but just your habits in your home. If you are a snacker person, or I call myself a grazer, if you're a grazer, or if you are somebody who has always needed a lot of either sugary foods or carby, snacky, kind of crunchy foods, different things like that could relax you and could produce dopamine. Because even the simple carbohydrates that aren't sugar produce sugar-like symptoms or similar symptoms in your body. Back to the cravings. So if you have gone on medication for your ADHD, you may find that even though they say on the symptoms that loss of appetite is a symptom, you also have a lack of need for the dopamine rush from carbohydrates and sweets. And because of that, you won't be looking for them all the time. And I know for me, before I went on medication for my ADHD, and I'm not saying everyone needs to, that's up to your doctor and that's up to you. But especially when I couldn't get myself to do something, I was experiencing the overwhelm or just lack of motivation or some anxiousness. I say anxiousness more than anxiety because I don't technically have anxiety, but if I've experienced that, I'll just walk in the kitchen and walk around and think, oh, I just need something to eat. I just need something to eat. I just need something to eat. Or if I'm bored, which is really just not a lack of motivation. It's not like there's not enough things to do in life, right? But if I'm looking for some kind of excuse to not do what takes more brain power, then I would go in the kitchen and just look for the quickest, fastest thing to give me that dopamine rush. And I used to wonder why some people have what they call sugar addiction and other people don't. And from what I've read is that sugar will give you this increase, but then it will take you down a little lower afterwards. And so once you get that increase and then it goes lower, at least back where it was, you just need it again. You need it again. And and there are some other things at play too, especially with high fructose corn syrup, which is in a lot of, candies or donuts or things like that. But if you have that, they say it actually intercepts with, I can't remember if it's called leptin or something like that, something in the brain. Don't quote me on that. I haven't looked into that in a while. But it makes it so, though, that part of your brain that signals to you when you're full, it disables it, or at least kind of makes it so it's not working correctly. Maybe it doesn't disable it forever, but it makes it so you're not even getting that signal that you're full. And for me, if I started eating ice cream, in the afternoon, in the morning, or baked cookies, once I had a little bit, I wanted more and more and more. And when I first got married, I would buy, a carton of ice cream. And I remember this especially after my first baby was born, that I would wake up and think, oh, I'm going to have a little bit of ice cream. And chocolate ice cream was my thing then. And so I'd have just some ice cream in a bowl. And then a little bit later, I'd think, oh, I want some more ice cream. And I'd pour milk over it and make it more like a crystally kind of shake-like thing. And then I'd think, oh, I want some more ice cream. And I make an ice cream cone. And it's not like I couldn't eat the same kind of, eat it the same way over and over. I've done that before too. But I would just keep eating it. That would be my meal. And over and over and over, if you can even call that a meal. And then there were a few times that my husband, who looked at food like he was filling up his car with gas to be able to do the next thing, he would come home, and there were times that he'd think, oh, ice cream sounds good. Maybe that'll, get me to my next time I need to eat. And he'd say, what happened to the ice cream? Because he'd know it was just in there, it wasn't open, and then all of a sudden it was gone. And I realized, oh my goodness, I can eat a half gallon. And that was back when all those cartons were a half gallon. They keep getting smaller now, at least most of the brands. But it was kind of embarrassing that I ate the whole carton that day. He didn't care. I mean, it wasn't like he was upset or anything, but he was just surprised. So then I started buying multiples so that if one was gone, there was another one there. But I knew in high school and in college that if I made cookies, and I loved to bake cookies, that I would eat the cookie dough, and I am one that eats the raw egg cookie dough. And I would eat the cookie dough while I was making the cookies, and then I'd eat a few when they were out, then I'd eat some more, and then I'd eat some more. And it didn't really occur to me that that was a problem until I reached a point where I was gaining weight, which was my senior year of high school, and then all through college. And I'd try to limit myself. My first diet book, I don't know if I've mentioned this before, was by Richard Simmons when I was in high school. It must have been my senior year. And it was called Never Say Diet, which was so funny because, of course, went on a million diets after that. But I do remember, writing my calories down and stuff like that, according to what he said in that book. But I found that every time I had some goal, and it's not like I haven't had success since then, but for the most part of that phase of my life, it was that yo-yo dieting. And if I was allowing sugar at the time, which I don't think I ever went off of sugar when I was in college. I think I did after college. I started having more of that approach of being healthier, but I try to limit my calories or whatever. And I'd bake cookies, and I'd tell myself, okay, you can have one when it comes out of the oven. And I'd eat one, and then I'd change it to two, because what's the big difference between one and two? And then I'd think, well, three, that's kind of like a triangle. Well, then four, like in my mind, I'm like justifying, like, I guess if it's a shape, it's better. It's a square. But anyway, and then I think, well, a half dozen. And then I think, well, 10. And then I eat a dozen and I lose count. And I think I just could not get enough of that dopamine. I needed it. And it wasn't really filling the need. And it would momentarily, but it really just kind of fueled my need in a way. And so the need for dopamine is a part of having ADHD, unless you don't have that symptom. But for most people, that is a symptom. And I also have learned, because I thought, well, why did I do better at not eating sugar as much when I was a little bit older and when I was having babies and would try to lose weight after having a baby? Because I would never gain a lot of weight being pregnant, but I would gain weight while I was breastfeeding, which a lot of women say, oh, you breastfeed and then the weight just flies off. That never happened for me. In fact, I'd usually gain another 10 or 15 or something. And now I look at it and it makes more sense in a lot of ways. But one of the reasons that I got better at not eating as much sugar or as much carbs, and I'm not saying consistently better, I'm just saying there were periods of my life in that dieting era where I would not have sugar for a year or 3 months or whatever it was. As soon as I had a little bit, it just shot off the need, and it was off the charts, and I'd have to really reel it in, where you had to work really hard not to have it for 3 days or whatever. But I was able to maintain that once I got my brain off of that quick fix idea, because impulse control is another problem with ADHD. I recently saw that it was more part of the hyperactive component, that there are some people who say, or some websites that say, there's the inattentive type, the attention deficit type, or the hyperactive type. And one website I was reading was saying hyperactive slash impulsive. But I don't know if that impulsivity only goes with the hyperactive part. I mean, obviously, if you've got the combined, it would be there. But the need to eat the way we've been comfortably eating, that's a habit for us that we know will relax us, could also interfere, because in our weak moments, we're hungry, we're tired, we're stressed, whatever that is, then that would be more of a challenge to stick with something, especially at the beginning when you're trying to develop that habit, when you have that impulse control problem. And I know this is starting to sound like, oh, there's no hope for us if we have ADHD, but there is. But back to the dopamine, another way that you can produce dopamine in your body is to exercise. So if you aren't taking medication that might increase your dopamine, don't feel like, oh no, there's no hope for me. There are other ways to produce dopamine release in your body, and one is to exercise. In fact, I just read there was a study where it was a randomized trial where adults who were taking stimulants and wanted to see if they could increase their dopamine availability into the body by exercising, they had them do an hour of either walking, jogging, or strength training 3 times a week. And after 8 weeks, it showed an increase in dopamine receptor availability in the body, which I don't know 100% what that means, the dopamine receptor availability, but it sounds like exercise changes your body. It can change your body to actually be able to produce the dopamine better. That being said, I've been exercising pretty consistently since 1996, and I still noticed a huge difference when I started taking medication that increases my dopamine. So, not saying once again that I'm recommending that for you. That's up to you and your doctor and your needs, but that could be something that you look into if you don't decide to use medication. Maybe there's supplements, maybe there are other ways besides exercise, although exercise is good too, that you could increase that dopamine. And then the GABA, what is interesting about that is GABA, I've read before or learned before that GABA production in the brain, another neurotransmitter, is related to anxiety, fear, stress management, But this study or this information about ADHD says that it's also responsible for inhibition. And if we have impulse control struggles, then low GABA could make it also harder to make those choices, right? But also with stress, if you're a stress eater, or if you've got anxiety or something's fearful, eating can be so calming. It's not the only thing that's calming. You know, I'm a yoga teacher. I know that yoga is incredibly calming, or just a steady pattern of breathing, whether you're out on a hike or you're just sitting and relaxing or lying down, also calming. But you can see why we reach for these quick fixes with food, which thankfully it's been available to me in my life. I know, speaking of ice cream, I know a lot of times when I was a mom, a younger mom, I'm still a mom, but I know I can think back to at least 94 when, actually probably before that, when we lived in this house, it was probably 93, 94. Yeah, not that that made a huge difference in the change for you, but for me, it means the difference between 2 children and 3 children. But I remember that's the first time I have the memory of going in a room, which in this house was a tiny, tiny bathroom. We lived in this tiny little log kind of cabin along a river north of Sacramento and in the middle of an orchard. And it was really beautiful, especially when, you know, the orchards bloomed and the trees bloomed and stuff. But I remember at certain parts of the day where I just needed a break. And I would go in the bathroom, which was so little. It had a door to our bedroom and had a door to the living room. All of these rooms were little. And I would get a bowl of ice cream and go sit in there. Only place to sit was either the bathtub, which was a clawfoot tub, and those have a very thin rim, so I couldn't sit there. So I'd put the seat down, sit there on the toilet, only place to sit, and just eat the ice cream without anybody else there. It was so calming to do that. And I continued to do that years later. I remember doing that in a house where it was a 2-story house. It was much bigger than the other one. And we had a separate garage with an attic ladder that went up pretty high up. It was higher than a second floor. And we'd go up there and the kids would swing. We had swings up there from the rafters. It was just a big room where we stored the clothes they grew out of till the next child grew into them, and Christmas decorations, Thanksgiving decorations, things like that. And it was just kind of a place to play if it was raining, but it was also storage. And I would go up there with ice cream sometimes when nobody else was around and eat my ice cream just to have a little break. So these things can be calming from stress as well. And GABA can also be produced other ways. I've seen it offered in a supplement. I've never purchased it, but I did learn in one of my trainings, a workshop that I took about yoga and anxiety, that yoga produces GABA in the brain. It raises the levels of GABA in the brain. And there's different reasons for that. One is the breathing, but another, which I thought was kind of fascinating, is the flexion and extension of the spine. And if you've ever arched your back one way, you know, where your shoulders are back and your rib cage is forward, that's flexion. No, wait, that's extension. Sorry. And then your shoulders coming in, your pelvis coming in, that's flexion. It sounds like, you know, you're flexing your back, but you're coming inward actually in a back bend. So in yoga, a common thing that we do just back and forth from that, they call it cat and cow, where you're on all fours. And I like to tell people they can, if you want to do this, you can do this. Maybe you're driving, you don't want to do this, you're laying down, that's fine. But you do it on all fours. Your hands are under your shoulders, your knees are under your hips. But I tell people that you don't have to have your hands flat down. If you'd rather have your knuckles down, you can. It's a little harder to balance. You got to lift your shoulders up to begin with. But if you have wrist issues, that might be more comfortable. But for cow, you're lifting your shoulders up, your head up, your tailbone up, and you've got that sway back. You're arching your back that way. like a cow, like the back of a cow. Where a cat, your shoulders are coming in, your pelvis is coming in, the big mid back is rising, your face is even coming in, and you're more like that Halloween cat. So going in between cow and cat pose, and I often do it, linking that with the breath, inhaling when you lift your head up, because it makes sense to inhale when you have more room in your lungs and the chest is coming out, the rib cage can go out more, and then you go inward, and that's your cat, and you're exhaling. And just doing that can produce GABA in the brain. Pretty fascinating, huh? But you could even do it seated. You could even do that, sit up tall, bringing the shoulders in, and do a little bit of that. And of course, other things in yoga, different poses are more back bendy. Other ones, you're folding forward, your head and shoulders come in a little bit. So it doesn't have to be back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, but pretty interesting, huh? So understanding what the low neurotransmitters are in the brain, the dopamine and the GABA, can be helpful, because if you can manage that in some way, whether it's supplements, exercise, yoga, medication that helps with that, it will help you with a sugar craving or a carb craving if that's what you have. Or lack of inhibitions might help with other things like buying too much or something like that. Another reason, at least just looking through what happens with ADHD, and when have I had some of the hardest time making solid choices with my eating? And it's when things are chaotic, in life. So during the COVID time, a lot of people gained weight, and there were a lot of reasons for that. One, maybe they weren't able to get to their gym anymore, and they didn't have exercise equipment or a home, or they didn't have space to do that, or whatever they were used to doing, maybe physically they couldn't do that. But also there was stress, right? There was a different kind of stress in the world for sure. But there was also just, I guess, just kind of a chaos of not understanding how things are going anymore. Things just aren't the same. That's the kind of chaos I'm talking about. When things aren't predictable, when you're not in a pattern that you were usually doing, it makes it harder to stick with other things in your life. And I look at those other times like, why was it harder for me to maintain my weight when I was breastfeeding? That was the time of being a mom that I felt the most chaotic in my brain. And I had a newborn. And whether I had 0 children before that or 5, it was a stage of life is so different right now. My body's not as capable or able to do what it once did. And I didn't have problems with postpartum depression, but if that's playing into that that could make things more chaotic too, or make it not as normal. I did see that dive or that postpartum depression with each baby for part of the time when I was in the hospital, usually for one day or half a day. And it was crazy to witness, because I knew it wasn't my norm, but I could not control it. So my heart goes out to anyone who deals with that much longer than I did. But that was a chaotic time of life, or a time that wasn't predictable, that I would look back to other times like, gosh, I used to be able to do this, this, and this, and now I can't do any of that. I couldn't keep it together. I couldn't manage my life like I wanted to. And the other times that I've seen my weight go up, and then I have to strategize to get it down again, because that's something that's always mattered to me, which is another point I'll bring up in a minute. But is whenever I've moved, that shift, whether it's the craziness that comes with having to pack things up, the craziness that comes with actually physically moving, the unpacking, that's my least favorite part. Even though I've convinced myself at some point that was fun. It is fun to set up a room, but unpacking is much more than setting up for a room. And so at that time, I'm the constant grazer, or I got to eat more, I got to eat more, because it's just chaos. And when we have ADHD, you may be thinking, well, Renee, I felt that way even without moving, or without having a newborn, or without it just being the COVID year or years, depending on where you lived, how much it affected your area or your life. And that's probably true, because with ADHD, our brains can be very chaotic. And that's why we really need routine. That's why we really need patterns to our day. That's why we really need to simplify our lives in any way that we can, or have a groove to it or a flow to it. Because when we do, we don't feel so out of control. We don't go seeking something to balance us, seeking like, and the idea of going for a run, that might work for somebody. They might have the time, they might have the love for running, they might have that habit. And yeah, that released stress and craziness in my life at one period of time, but I've never been able to convince myself to enjoy it since. I did for a couple of years and that was it. But you may have other ways that can help you manage that. But eating is definitely a go-to for that. And it can be calming, and it can lead to eating more than our bodies need. And if I were to give one tip, well, two tips for, remember all my years of trying different eating plans and approaches. And for me, with the ADHD brain, what I've learned is what people eat may vary from person to person, or even the amount of calories, or how much they exercise, or what kind of exercise. Whatever you do that you enjoy, that is healthy for you, that helps you to your goal, that's what you'll stick with the most, for sure, right? We know that. If we're suffering through it, we probably won't stick with it. But I've also found that finding a way for my brain to be quiet in the decisions of my eating is really helpful, because when you're making decisions like, should I start this today? Should I eat this way? Should I, if you don't have a solid idea of what you want to do, and you keep questioning yourself or changing your mind, which I've done over and over and over, it makes it harder each time. If it's a little too open, I should say, you may stress yourself out or overburden your brain by having to make those choices. And so if choosing to, should I eat now? Should I not eat now? If that isn't really defined for you, then maybe having eating windows would be helpful. There's the whole idea of intermittent fasting, and I'm not saying you have to do that, but even just knowing this is my time when I'm going to eat, and this is the time when I'm not. And when I've done that, and it's been a couple different approaches, and one of them was intermittent fasting. But another one was a book that I read called Lean Habits. And I found when I first read her book that having a defined time of not eating was so relaxing for my brain, because I didn't have to make any decisions about eating during that time. I didn't have to go through the stress of, is that really the best thing to eat? Are you wishing you had this instead? Once I could commit to having those eating windows, and I did learn to give myself some freedom with that, because with more of a black or white brain, if you quote unquote mess up or don't stick to it for maybe a very valid reason, then you may just throw it all away. So I had to give myself some grace there, where even with the intermittent fasting, I may have gotten to a point where I was doing the 16-hour fast window and 8-hour eating for the most part. But I told myself, if you're ever at 10:14 or even 12:12, you're not going to beat yourself up about it. And I even started with that bigger window of eating just to get used to not having to not waking up and eating right away, or not eating until I went to sleep, just to develop that. But I really had to give myself some grace. I had to give myself some leeway. So if I didn't stick with it, because life has variation in it, we have traveling, we have different things. But if I still was able to keep myself within some frame, I was eating healthier. And I found that when I had an eating window and knew this is your time to eat, I looked at it more, kind of more like my husband with stopping to get gas. You got to stop and fill up the car because you need to make it, 4 more hours in the car or something like that. That it wasn't like I didn't enjoy food, or I didn't think I wasn't eating it for that enjoyment, because that's important too. But it made it so I was looking at it like, this is your only chance to eat until tomorrow morning. You don't want to just eat something that really doesn't help your body in some way, or make it so you can make it till then without starving or feeling deprived or whatever. And it gave me more of a mindset of abundance, of look at all the things I have to choose from. What am I going to narrow it down to, instead of, I can't believe I'm not eating that anymore. And, there are times that I do look more at the, maybe you shouldn't eat that kind of food as often. And there's other times that I don't. And I try not to burden my brain with that anymore, because it got exhausting to, have that. I think that was my hyper focus, and my obsessive nature went into the food thing. And it's probably really common if you're a woman who was a teen, or a woman in the 80s with that diet culture, the 90s, the diet culture. And there still is a culture, but it is so much more forgiving now. I look at my daughters and the eating mindset that they have compared to what I put myself through. And it was out there for sure, but I was also seeking it because I was buying this book and that book and trying this approach and that approach. And it can mess with your brain. So you want to do what is the easiest for your brain, what is the most doable for you to stick with, and give yourself grace when your environment is chaotic, but do what you can to help your environment not be so chaotic. So I think that's it's for today. That's it for today. Sometimes my mouth doesn't work. I'm sorry about that. I could be a person that stops and edits constantly. I do stop every once in a while, but sometimes I just got to keep going. Just got to keep going. So thanks for listening now and any other time that you have. I really appreciate it. And if you haven't looked into any of the free things that I have on my website, I have made kind of a variety. One is the 5-day challenge that I talked about the last few episodes. The first challenge was last week. I've got a second one going now. And it's been a lot of fun to see how people are doing. And I stay in touch with anyone who emails me back and lets me know how they're doing, at least at this stage in the game, because it's not so hard to manage. There's not so many people doing it that I can't stay in touch. But that's one. It's a 5-day focus challenge. You get an email each day. I send a little video, little task, and it shouldn't take you more than a half hour a day unless you want to spend more time on it. I also have a few free yoga classes that I put on there. One is yoga for scattered minds, and the other one is lie down and let go. I think that's a really short one when you just need a short break. I think it's 10 minutes, 12 minutes or something like that. I also have just a PDF on 5 tips for doing yoga with a scattered mind, even for people who don't have ADHD. There are a lot of people who think, I can't get my mind to shut off. And maybe you don't want to do yoga. That's fine too. I'm still your friend. I am. But, and there's a few other things I'm still working on more. I want to offer a lot of free content. I'll eventually offer some paid content too. But right now I'm starting with the free stuff. So thanks for being here. and I should be back later this week. Bye.
Open windows, broken shadows. Frozen dreams are left for tomorrow. Without a cause, no time for a pause. Short, the silence of sound has yet been found, but not by me.